If you have your Bibles, I invite you to open them with me to the book of Genesis, the 22nd chapter. Genesis, the 22nd chapter, I'll begin reading with verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Verse 2. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Verse 9 said, when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood, bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Verse 10, then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy. He said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you trust God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by the horns. I'll stop reading there, but I want to speak to you today. The Lord really spoke to my heart about speaking to you today on the subject, can God trust you? Can God trust you? I believe with all of my heart, we're living in a time and living in a day when God is looking for people He can trust. I thought about in Luke chapter 1 how the Bible said concerning the Virgin Mary, she was chosen, which means that there were other virgins who were candidates in the running to become the mother of God. But there was something about Mary that God liked, and something about her that He could trust, to such an extent that the greatest trust God ever invested in a human being, He invested in that 17-year-old girl, because He found a teenager that He could trust to be pure. Abraham was a man that God could trust. The promises were made to Abraham. Look at the stars, Abraham. So shall your seed be. So shall your children and grandchildren be. You know the story. Isaac comes along in his old age. Sarah's old. He's old. But they, by God's help, produce a child. And suddenly Isaac is born. And now God comes back years later and He says, now that I've proven myself, and even though biologically it was impossible, and even though time frame wise you were both too old to produce and have a child, I told you I would give you a child, and now you found out you can trust me. And what I want to say back to you is, can I trust you now? Now I want you to take the very thing that I gave you, your son, and go to Mount Moriah and lay him on an altar, tie him to it, and kill him, as an act that you trust me. See, I really believe that sometimes God will allow us to be tested, and God will allow us to be tried, because He wants to know, do we love Him or do we love the things that He gives us? If you chase God, blessings will always chase you. But if you chase blessings, you can chase the blessing and miss the God. You can even get the blessing. Sometimes Satan will give you the blessing in order that you don't chase God. I really believe that the priority for busy people have to battle keeping God first place in their life. And I got to thinking about why in the world would God tell Abraham? He even said in His word that He was against human sacrifice. Why would He turn around and tell Abraham to take his boy up and offer him as a human sacrifice? You got to understand what was taking place. You see, Abraham lived in a heathenistic society. There were no Bibles, there were no churches. God had not revealed Himself to mankind. And so they worshiped idol gods, and the way they worshiped is they put their children in the fire and they sacrificed their kids, their firstborn, to their gods. And God was saying to Abraham, I've seen how the heathen love their gods. They love their gods enough to give their best child. And I want to know if you love me as much as the heathen loves me, Abraham. So I want to see. And I thought about that, and I wondered if God sometimes, and I don't have anything against sports, and I love them, watch them myself. But I wonder sometimes, does God go and listen in to the stadiums and hear the people screaming and shouting to their idols and to their gods? And then He sticks His ear in and He says to the church, do you love me as much as the heathen loves their God? Wonder if He sees people chasing money and materialism and things with passion and fervency and all that they've got, using their talents. And He says back to Himself, I wish that my people loved me as much as the heathens love their gods. The Bible said that God spoke to him and He said, you take your son Isaac and you lay him on an altar. And I think it's important that God became specific enough to tell him, I want Isaac. Because you know what I believe Abraham would have done if God would have just said, I want your son? You know, Abraham had two sons. One of them was Ishmael and one of them was Isaac. And I've got a feeling that the first thing he would have done if God hadn't been specific was run out and grab Ishmael from the desert somewhere and laid him on the altar. Because we're real good at offering our Ishmaels as a substitute for our Isaacs. We don't want to give God our best. We want to give God our second best, and we want to hold on to our best. I read a story not too long ago, true story of a missionary who was hearing and interviewing a woman who was in a far region, remote area of India. And she said that this woman was grieving because she had done something in idol worship. She had birthed and given birth to twins, and one of the babies was severely deformed, and the other child was perfectly normal and beautiful. And it was the tradition of that area that the firstborn child had to be offered to the river god. There was a river there in India that they worship, and they do to this day. And they would go and take the firstborn child and throw it into the river. And she had twins, so she had a choice. She could take the deformed child, or she could take the beautiful, healthy child. And she took the beautiful, healthy child and threw it into the river as a sacrifice to her river god. The missionary asked her, said, why did you do this? And she said, we only offer our God the best. I wonder sometimes if we don't try to substitute our best for Ishmael. I wonder sometimes if God doesn't deserve our best, the best of our time. I don't think we ought to come in and kind of drag and worship. I don't think you ought to stay out to 1 o'clock at night looking at movies and drag into church on one day that God's asked you to come worship and kind of go through the routine. I believe that we don't need to offer Him Ishmael. We need to offer Him Isaac, our very best worship, our very best time, our very best attention, because He's worthy of it this morning. See, it's easy for me to fast liver and onions. But it's another thing for me to fast ice cream, because I enjoy one and I don't care much about the other. Now I want to ask you, where's the sacrifice in your relationship? When's the last time you gave something of yourself beyond just what is normal and what you think is getting by? When's the last time you gave Him Isaac, not Ishmael? Isaac is your best. Isaac is everything that means anything to you.